Voice 6. This is Mad Dog. Enemy contact. Enemy contact. Prepare for sit rep. Over. Mad Dog 6. This is the Voice 6. Go ahead. Over.
Hello everybody, this is G, and welcome to the SitRep Modern Miniature Wargaming Podcast, your home for everything associated with modern miniature wargaming. And with me as always is Chris.
Hi everybody.
And Jim Johnson Oriskany, the historical editor over at Beast of War / On Tabletop.
Good afternoon everyone.
And our very special guest tonight is Colin from Radio Dishdash, all the way on the other side of the planet in New Zealand. Welcome, Colin.
G'day.
So, we're all here gathered around the sand table, and the sand table, for any of you who don't know what a sand table is a item that the military uses to plan out operations. Now, of course, I'm kind of aging myself because I think most modern planning sessions are going digital, so I don't know how many sand tables are actually still being used. But we like to call our table where we round around and talk everything modern miniature wargaming as the sand table. So, to get this show started, Chris, why don't you catch us up on what you've been working on this past week?
Oh, I've been catching up with cleaning and painting and weathering 3D prints for vehicles for my Ukrainian project. I've got another T-72 on the go and 2 more UAZ 469 Jeeps, and I'm also starting to work on a project log for Beasts of War and on tabletop, so I can put this stuff up, all the pictures and videos and stuff like that. And I also started working on my infantry from Special Artists and Service Miniatures for the Ukrainians. So it's been a pretty busy week for me.
That's a that's a very interesting conflict. We did an article series on the Ukrainian war on tabletop about 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite articles.
we definitely got a response. I'll say that much.
I don't know if it was the response you were looking for.
It was overall positive.
Yeah,
but
it was a lot of good discussion.
Yes, it was good
debate. It definitely caught the community off guard. But anyway, the point is that that's really a really interesting conflict. So for your infantry, are you building like UAF, Ukrainian armed forces, or are you building some of the local militias that are fighting against like DNR or LPR separatists? Or
I've got right now on the table right in front of me, I've got units that I'm using for volunteer battalion. I have ordered some miniatures from Spectre to use as regular Ukrainian armed forces. I'm using some of the Mina figures from Spectre.
Okay.
With some more sculpting and converting. And then I've got DNR forces as well that I've been putting together. And most of the miniatures that I have right now are from Special Artists and Service Miniatures Ukrainian line. But I have taken some of Warlord's plastic Spec Ops figures and converted them and sculpted new parts and stuff that I'm working on too, especially for crew-served weapons for my Jeeps and stuff. I've taken some of the plastic miniatures and converted and sculpted them so they're sitting in the driver's seats or they're mounted on the weapons in the backs of the Jeeps and stuff. So. Awesome.
Just to give people an idea of how informal parts of this war really are, I was doing research for this article series and ran across a media reporter. He was interviewing one of the colonels. I say colonels, you can't see me on this podcast, but I'm doing air quotes. One of these leaders of these Ukrainian volunteer militias that are fighting the bulk of this war. The Ukrainian army is not in it that much. Yeah. And he's having this discussion with the guy, and he's got the ski mask on, he's got the AKM, he looks like a terrorist, and he's supposedly one of the quote unquote good guys. He's like, so how are you doing? Do you have many men in your battalion? He's like, like, well, we're doing okay. So how's your recruiting going? Well, we're doing much better ever since we got our Facebook page up. This is a war literally being run by Facebook and Kickstarter. It's absolutely out of control over there. The quote-unquote good news for us as hobbyists is that it gives us a lot of freedom for infantry of various levels, all kinds of vehicles, all kinds of ad hoc equipment. It really is the Wild West out there.
Yeah, I was talking to Gianna in one of our other episodes about the fact that I know somebody that's there. He was living in Canada, but his family's from Ukraine, and he's gone back. And the reason he went back was to get his grandmother out of Donetsk. And now he was in one of the volunteer battalions, but a lot of them have been pulled into the regular army. Okay. Some of the smaller ones. So he's in the National Guard, I think it's what they call it there. And he sent me pictures of PTR anti-tank rifles from 1941.
Wow.
They're still using them. There's a water-cooled Maxim gun in one of the pictures.
No, there isn't.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Check this out. Maxim gun. And
I tell you what, though, that PTRD is going to put a nice big hole in any kind of BRDM or a VTR, maybe even a BMP at a decent range.
Yeah, and he sent me quite a few pictures. And the reason he sent me these pictures is because I served with him in Yugoslavia, what used to be Yugoslavia, and we were in Sarajevo together in '92. And the thing is when we were there, we saw tons of World War II equipment that was still being used by the different sides, like not just small arms, but we saw M36 Jacksons.
Wow!
On one occasion.
Battle of the Bulge stuff, man. You're going way back.
Yeah, and we saw lots of equipment that was World War II issued weapons, not just Mausers or anything like that. We saw tanks. I think at one point we saw a German half-track. It's incredible that, and you're still seeing that. You're seeing T-34s in the Middle East being used.
Oh, yeah.
I saw a video
I think Angola still uses them.
Yeah, I saw, Yemen, and the guys were firing an 85 millimeter gun on a T-34-85, but they were so afraid of firing it from the inside of the tank, they pulled a cord through one of the hatches. There's video of it on YouTube.
Oh, that's great.
I was just, because they're like, okay, well, this might blow up in our face. But
it's weird because the Ukrainian military or I should say the Ukrainian arms industry is one of the most advanced in the world. Their T-84 is basically a much upgraded, modernized version of the T-64. It's actually pretty damn good. The new BTR, Yep, the new BTR APC. Here's the problem, though. None of that stuff is going to the Ukrainian army. The oligarchs are selling it all. In fact, the only BTRs, to my knowledge, the only BTR-4s, the newest, APC that they're using, and it's more of a Western model. I know it has BTR in the front of it, but it has like the engine in front and the troop bay in back. The way we build our wheeled APCs, not the way the Soviets used to build them, is the Ukrainian military built, or I should say Ukrainian arms manufacturers built these things, shipped them to Iraq for the new army they're trying to put together down there. They arrived faulty. They had rust all over them or whatever. They were rejected in shipment. And that's the only way that the Ukrainians got, their own equipment, is because a foreign buyer rejected them, the condition that they arrived in. And it's nuts. And meanwhile, you've got people doing, crowdfunding, borderline Kickstarter, saying, hey, we need, boots, we need gloves, we need parkas, we need basic stuff. Yeah. And these people in Kiev are actually getting, pretty wealthy, building this top of the line, NATO level gear and selling it to other countries. Meanwhile, their own country is quite literally falling apart.
Yeah,
it's nuts.
But that's what I've been working on.
How about you, Jim? What have you been working on?
Oh, wow. Well, a lot, actually. It's been really busy. I promised myself some time off from on tabletop and from gaming in general when I got back from the boot camp. The boot camp and the subsequent week afterwards. This is the recent Bolt Action Desert War boot camp that they had for their new Western Desert material that's been coming out. That week was absolutely nuts. It was absolutely crazy. I got this huge 28 millimeter prize and box set that they honored me with at the end of the boot camp. I didn't even know I was going to be getting an army, but they showered me with all the it's like 6 months worth of work they gave me. Thanks guys. And then I finally get back off the plane. I get over the jet lag, and then I'm like, what's coming up? As historical editor on tabletop is the 100th anniversary of the 1918 armistice that ended World War I. So it's not exactly modern war, but as historical editor, you have to cover, the range. We can't let this anniversary get by us.
Right.
So we're doing a very quick article series. We're kind of crashing. I spent all weekend on it, 12-hour days trying to crush this thing out. And that's going to cover, the 100 Days, Second Battle of Amiens, the San Quentin Canal, of course, all the American stuff. We got 82nd Infantry Division engaged in Argonne Wood.
Oh, yeah.
We got the Battle of San Miguel. We got Marines again. We hit the Marines very hard for Bella Wood. We did the 100th anniversary of Bella Wood earlier this year. And now we're coming back because the Marines were also engaged at Argonne Forest, along with many more Army divisions. The French are mixed up in there. The Belgians even get into it. I mean, it really expands into a major effort that they didn't know was going to end the war. But once that momentum got started, and the Germans proved to be a lot weaker than everyone thought they would, before you know it, the war was wrapping up. So that anniversary is coming up in less than 3 weeks. We really want to hit it. It's once in a lifetime opportunity. We can't exactly, pencil in an article series for the 200th anniversary.
Yeah.
So we really want to hit it, and that's been pretty much chewing up all my hobby time, to be perfectly frank.
Wow, that's a little project, just a little one.
Just a little.
Yeah. How about you, Colin? What do you get to do for hobby?
So, I write games, Rob. So, I'm one of these people that gets other people to paint most of their miniatures and things like that. So, for me this week was putting the finishing touches to our new Kickstarter, making sure Skirmish Normandy went off to the editors and putting together the next Dispatches number 3. So it's all been on the go, as well as, trying to balance all these things with, having some games and having some fun with friends and, generally having a good time.
Fantastic. And we're going to be talking about all that here in a minute. Just to wrap up this part for myself, if you've been looking at the Facebook page, you'll see that I have actually started working on the SASM SOCR boat. That's the Riverine, Special Operations Craft Riverine boat, and the crew. I got it assembled and primed, and I actually started the base colors and camo. It's called hurried camo. Basically, they take spray rattle cans. I still can't get over that one. It's a British term, I guess. But here in the U.S., we call it a spray can. And they just spray all kinds of lines of black and brown and green. And that's exactly what I did. Used my airbrush, and it actually looks pretty good, I think.
It does. It looks really good.
So I'll be working on getting the crew painted up and getting it inserted. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to base this boat on a rectangular base, and I'm going to use Real Effects water to give it some water movement, so it's not just static. So we'll see how that turns out.
So is this modern, or is this like 80s or Vietnam?
It's modern. It's
okay.
So basically, this particular model, if I'm not mistaken, and Tim from SASM can correct us in the show notes. This is kind of based off of Act of Valor. If you saw that movie when the 2 Riverine boats came up to extract the seals, those boats there. So, they have 2 miniguns on them. They've got dual 240s, I believe it is, and then they have a 50 cal on the stern of the boat. So, oh boy, it'll get your blood going.
I was going to say that's going to be pretty much your whole army list right there.
Yeah, right. That's 100 points. That's 100 points. Who needs anything else? You got 2 miniguns. What's going to stand up that? Unfortunately, you can only carry so much ammo, and you can burn through ammo with a minigun like it's nobody's business. So that's pretty much what I've been working on. And then, other than that, I've been reviewing a game called Skirmish Sangin and all of its expansions. I wonder why. So that brings us to Colin. Colin, let's start talking about all your fun projects and what you got going on, what you got coming up.
In the business, we call that a segue.
Wow.
That was the segue right there. That's great.
Yeah.
Almost like I did it on purpose.
Like you knew it.
So we want to get to know you a little bit first. So tell us how you got started in miniature wargaming.
Okay, I think probably like most people my age, I started with Airfix models, and then Airfix 1/72 scale plastic miniatures, and a very dear book, which was Skirmish Wargaming by Donald Featherstone. And I, at the time, as a young boy, wrote the man a letter, and I was very, very pleased that I got a response back from him. He was brilliant in that sense. And from there on, I was hooked on miniature wargaming, but always in the kind of skirmish aspect, mainly because I couldn't afford to have massive armies. So I used to play in that kind of individual level. And then obviously from there, got into role-playing games and also, and continued on. I basically played all the sorts of games as they come out, the whole through the Warhammer aspects and things like that. And just developed a keen interest in all sorts of games, basically.
So what would you say outside of your own games, what is your favorite miniatures war game? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, yeah. I'm just trying to think what the name of it is. There is a relatively new Napoleonics skirmish game that a friend of mine, Ray, ran for me, and unfortunately I can't remember its name. And I loved it because I spent most of the game chasing a goose, because that was the... But it still had we had 8 miniatures aside. It was at 40 millimeter, beautiful miniatures. It was a thing to behold, and a lovely board to play on. And you got the idea was that we were foragers and we were trying to get enough food to take back. So yeah, chasing this goose around the place, trying to keep it alive. So yeah, that's the game I've played at the moment that I've had the most fun with.
Really,
Napoleonic miniatures, is that maybe Sharp's Practice?
No, it's not that. It's it was a Kickstarter game, and I can't. Unfortunately, I will find it so you can put it in the notes. But unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the game. But the scale of 40 millimeter was really nice. Only having 8 miniatures aside, it really felt became much more personal, much more fun aspect to the game. So yeah, so like I say, I'm a big skirmish gamer. So anything that's skirmish gamed, I usually give it a go. And then before that, a couple of Western games we've been playing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That's cool. So yeah, I'd like to give most of these games a go.
Yeah, of course. So what inspired you to create Skirmish Sangin?
So Skirmish Sangin is probably the most videoed. Sorry, Skirmish Sangin. The war in Afghanistan is probably the most videoed war ever. But the difference between it and things like Vietnam, where you had reporters videoing it, is you had the guys running around with head cameras.
Yeah.
Because cameras could become so small, they're on the ends of weapons, they're on helmets, they're on shoulders. You got first-hand view, and I, just by pure accident, started watching these things on YouTube, and then started seeing the documentaries that were going on, and became really, really fascinated with the conflict. And and from there started to learn about it and do a bit of history and try and figure out all the bits and pieces. And we started to play or attempt to play games. We used several different systems and didn't quite find what we wanted. So we ended up writing our own. And then, as is all these things go, is the more you write it, the more people play it, the more people respect it. We thought we'd take the plunge and push it out there. And the rest, they say, is history.
Very cool. So that leads us to the next question. Why modern? There are some people who say modern is a difficult subject to tackle, or a difficult genre to tackle. It's too soon. It's too recent. Beast of War on Tabletop did a big dedicated XLBS show to it. We talked about it on this show as well. So yeah. Did you have concerns when you were designing the game that it being a modern game, it might be not well received, or you'd have people criticizing your choice of genre?
Yes, we did. And what we tried to do was be as close to the facts and reality as possible, and to represent the people that were there. And we've been very lucky that we've had a tremendous amount of support and feedback from either people still in the military or ex-military, people who've been there. We were very lucky to talk to a lot of Kiwis that had been there and come back. And what they said to us was, go for it. Really, don't hold back, go for this. It's something that they wanted to see. They wanted this aspect that people to possibly understand a little bit, and I emphasize a little bit, it's a game after all, of what some of the things that they'd done and the aspect. And I was very fortunate in the year we released it in the UK, is to sit down with two guys who were amputees from being in Afghanistan, who quite happily sat down and played the game with me. So when anybody gives me that level of criticism, I'm like, these guys were more than happy to sit down and play the game, and I would have accepted any criticism from them. And all they came was like, they get telling me extra stories and bits and pieces. And the one thing their one criticism was the tables are too clean. There needs a lot more. There's a lot more rubbish knocking around in Afghanistan,
Yeah.
And so first-hand accounts and the support we had from the people there, I've always felt that we're trying to do the best we can to represent an element. Now, I know it's not for everybody, and I'm more than happy if people don't play the game because they feel that for them it's too soon. But the only thing I put into retrospect is every year here at Armistice Day, we watch the World War II guys all march, those few of them that are left, down after the cannon fires at 6 a.m. in New Zealand, and nobody thinks twice about those guys, right?
Yeah.
So to me, all serving men should be treated with the same level of honor. And if I'm willing to play World War II or Vietnam or any other game, I should be willing to play moderns. And that's my take. I don't believe it should be everybody's take, but that's where I come from.
I agree with you.
I completely would agree with that. It's one of the things that I've run across. That whole is it too soon debate on Beasts of War on tabletop recently actually came from a comment I dropped on the previous week's Weekender XLBS thread. I didn't mean to start a thing. It's just something Warren saw. I decided to make an episode out of it.
Yeah.
But one of the things I'm always running across is, it's too soon. It's too soon. I'm like, okay, well, why is it okay? I mean, I'm not trying to challenge people, but, why is it okay to, sing? Because, we play war games. War games are about war, and war is about, unfortunately, killing people. Why is it okay to, recreate, Johnny Reb shooting Billy Yank, or, the Redcoats and the Rebels, or, how far back people were getting killed, in wars and getting hurt in wars since time immemorial. There isn't a statute of limitations on human suffering. If it's okay to play a war that took place 500 years ago, it should be okay to play a war that's going on right now. The only additional challenge I would see to playing modern war, at least I have found, both in playing modern wars or in even writing about them, is that so much of the material is still classified. Reliable information is sometimes tough to get a hold of.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't know about you guys, but I think some of the bigger critics out there have been people who aren't even veterans.
Yeah.
They feel like they should stand up for us, good intentions or otherwise. A lot of the bigger dissenters out there are people who have not experienced it, and they're trying to speak for us. So, to each their own, I know
there are a couple on Beasts of War. I mean, I won't mention them by name. I don't want to embarrass them, but they are veterans. They're veterans that were in a lot longer than I was.
Yeah.
I was in relatively briefly, but these guys were in for the long haul, and they honestly, they've, their record books sound like a history of the Cold War, and the war on terror and everything else. And they say, look, honestly, it's too soon. And obviously, you're going to respect their opinion.
Of course.
But again, there's also tons of veterans out there that feel the exact opposite way. So when those guys stand up and speak out, I do listen. Obviously, a lot more. But you're right. The people who've haven't been there or whatever, that weren't in, and especially if they didn't see combat at all. I mean, I never saw any combat of any description. That's when it's like, really, do we really need, I don't want to say, a protection or defense or anything, but if a veteran is okay, like, I'm really surprised to hear about these amputees. If a veteran, especially a combat wounded veteran, is okay with it, then, he's okay with it. I don't think we need, any protection from, other people that might, have the best intentions, but at the same time,
Yeah.
I'd just like
you get what
to
I'm trying to say.
come in on that as well. A friend of mine was in the Iraq War 1, and he doesn't play. And we said to him, would you like to play? He's like, Colin, I'm more than happy for you to write the rules. I'm more than happy for you to run the games, but I personally don't want to play it. He said, but I would never stop you guys doing it. You have a lot of fun. I see all the laughter and things, and you enjoying it. He said, I'm all for you doing it, but for me personally, it's too close. And we said, okay, not a problem. You tell us when you're going to be available, because obviously being still in the military, he disappears for periods of time. We won't do it when you're here. He's like, no, play it when I'm here. I can quite happily play something else. But he's quite happy to allow us to do what we want to do and, live and let live. But he's just decided it's not for him. And that's the way I look at most things is, as long as I'm not offending somebody and as long as somebody else can do what they want to do, I'll let them do what they want to do and they let me do what I want to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we've beaten that topic to death. So, Colin, take us through Skirmish Sangin. How do you start? What's the premise?
The basic premise is obviously it's ISAF versus the Taliban. The scale is about a squad, 2 fire teams, ISAF top side, 10 to 15 Taliban. It is small scale. Each individual man is named. The idea being is that one man can make a difference, and that definitely plays through in the games. The other thing we wanted to do was to make sure a game could be played in a 2-hour period of time, and it's very rare for a game to go beyond 2 hours. Conceptually, you create your sides. There are points allocated to both sides, and obviously set the terrain up and off you go. But which is just like every other game. The difference, I think, comes about in the turn sequence, which is reasonably different. Whereas everybody has a body rating, and they activate on that body rating, which means that you don't go, I go, you go. You could have several people in one side active, and it swaps over, maybe 1 or 2 on the opposite side and then back, because everybody gets to activate in the combat phase, right? And you work through that process. So those are the sort of differences. But the kind of key elements that we've added to that are things like, for ISAF, they have an optional rule that we always play, which is if they take a casualty, the mission changes. The mission is all about getting the casualty now off the board. Right, so that can make a very big difference in your tactics,
and it adds some really nice realism to
we'll
your game.
Try to get, realistic as possible with our elements without getting too in your face. The other aspect being as well is we've used real ranges for weapons and grenades and just about everything you can possibly imagine. So a rifle, assault rifle on in the scale of 28mm that we do, will fire 20 feet in scale. So you don't ever have to measure on our tables, right? The only thing you'd ever measure would be a pistol, and that has a 50-inch range. Sorry, 25-inch range, because it's 50 meters. We use a scale of 2 meters to the inch that we find works really well. If we drop the game down to 15 mil, we swap that for centimeters. But yeah, other than that, that's the only change we do. So, grenades can have a 15-inch outer burst radius and a 5-inch kill zone. So it makes a difference for people who have played that typical rifles firing 24 inches in games and a 6-inch disc used for grenades from the kind of more traditionalist. Mm-hmm. And you have to really think far more tactically about what you can afford to do and not do.
And that's awesome because, I'm skimming through the book as you're talking about it and looking at weapons, and it's just like a heavy machine gun.
Yep.
The minimum range is 5 inches, and the maximum range is 500 inches.
Yeah.
500 inches in gameplay. How big of a table are you playing on?
So we play on a variety of tables, from 4x4, 6x4 to 10x8. A 10x8 is a lot of fun, as you can imagine. It does make that stretched right into the middle that little bit difficult, but it does mean that, when you've got sort of 30 figures on a 10x8 board with lots of terrain elements and trees and all the rest of it, rivers, etc., there's a lot of room for you to maneuver. But also, you've got to remember that most contact in Afghanistan is at the 500-meter mark, and at 10 feet we're still only at the 200-meter mark. So we're still well within doable ranges, but even at that point it makes for a very interesting game. It stops that whole because I'm out of range, I'm going to walk in the clear, because you're 24-inch range, you can't shoot me, so I'm just going to walk straight without any cover or whatever. You have to think about cover every single part of the game. You have to move from cover to cover. You can never risk being out in the open. All these sorts of things. It becomes a tactical game. And this is what we were trying to achieve.
So wait a second. Let me make sure I heard you correctly. You have a 10x8 table. 10 feet, I'm assuming. Okay, 10 feet by 8 foot table, and you have only 30 figures on the table?
Yeah.
That
30
is
figures and possibly
awesome.
a couple of might be a couple of vehicles in there. There might be a couple of tentacles with the Taliban, or there might be one or two APCs. Usually a helicopter overhead somewhere. These sorts of things. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, we just came from the boot camp, and at the boot camp we did a series of interviews that we called Scorpions of the Desert. I mean, this is obviously 1941, but still the same basic problems. I'm like, guys, the rules require you that your figures can only be 1 inch apart at 28 millimeter. I'm like, here's I actually had a World War II handbook in front of me. This is my great uncle carried this in 1941. I flip open the book. You're supposed to have 10 meters in real terms, between your figures. You can't be doing this kind of thing. Another guy was talking about, well, I use 25 pounders in direct fire roll. I'm like, on a 4-foot table? Do the math. A 25 pounder, I'm literally at the courthouse pub. I'm 700 feet away, and I'm dropping shells on you here in the studio. I mean, I'm sure it's fun, and it's a great game, and God knows it's popular. But I'm like, guys, you guys got to take a look at, you guys got to look at your scales again. But 30 guys, 30 infantry. I'm assuming that's both sides. So I'm figuring 10 regular versus maybe 20 irregular on an 80 square foot. Yeah, that's actually realistic. There's no logarithmic scaling in that. It doesn't sound like there's no.
No, we try to make it that play at that level, and like with all games, there's a level of abstraction in the game. There has to be. At the end of the day, it's a game. It's supposed to be fun, but it does make things like chases, like Soul Survivor scenario that we did, very much fun, because you've got room to actually run and stop, and then try and hit them hard, and then run again, and especially when the helicopter is coming in, and can you get everybody back out to get picked up and things like this. So it gives you space to play the game, because I don't think you need I don't need to line up 30 vehicles all in a row, as some games do, when there's no space between them, and move them. That's not what I'm about. I'm trying to
tank fenders touching.
1 or 2 vehicles tops. Like I say, small units, getting a feel for what happens. Where one man with an LMG can make a real difference if he's in the right place and activating at the right time.
I was just gonna say, if your whole army is only 10 guys, then each man is definitely better make a difference.
Yeah.
So it's those sorts of things. But at the same time, the bad guys, if we want to call them that, the Taliban, they've got those RPGs. And they can make a mess of things if you're too close. Hence the reason, this idea of trying to be an inch apart in games, we don't have any of that in these games, And also it's different, because in modern, everybody's got a headset. They can communicate. They can pass information to each other. So we can have information passed right across the board of a group of men, because obviously they've got headsets on. As long as the guy who sees somebody spends the AP or action points, which powers everything, to pass that information across, everybody on the network picks up the information. So we've tried to bring all those things that happen in a modern day combat and add them into the game. And we like to think of it as, well, some people describe it as RPG light. Mm-hmm. We call it interactive wargaming, because it's about the story. It's about afterwards, when we're sitting around having a beer or a cup of tea, if that's what you think. The stories we tell about the guy that did X. Bob did this, and did you see how that worked? And because the people become real, they become characters to us. And the fact that you can have a campaign game where these guys come in and out, really gives some flavour to it. So, we've set it up in the past where we've started with a platoon of guys, but they're only going out in small patrols, and we see how that platoon is affected, and newbies come in as novices, and work through that process. So it gives you the storyline of the whole group to play with.
As you said, it's kind of an RPG light. So in more ways than one, because you can actually create your own troopers, soldiers,
yeah,
Marines.
So rather than just rather than just having that one stat line that everybody's got, it's this, so it's this, everybody's got the same. You roll 1d10, add it to 10, it gives you a value, and that's your body rating. And basically from that, you work out when you activate, what all your skills are, etc., all from that dice roll. And what we've also done is we've broken it down into novice, average, veteran, and elite. Now, if you're very high on the average level and very low on the veteran level, there will be a crossover. You can get some averages who are better shooting than some vets. But the vet has much better morale than the average, right? So we've got these blurred crossovers, because this concept of being, you're suddenly a super soldier because you go from this to that, it doesn't mean to say you're a better shot. It means to say you've got more morale. Mm-hmm. You've got more about you, you're more used to dealing with the pressures, all those kind of things. So there's a very thin band between each one where there's a crossover. And of course, the aspect as well is you then got trained troops, which are usually average or veteran or elite, and the Taliban have novice, average, or veteran. The Taliban aren't allowed to have elites because they have no, even the Mujahideen is only really veterans. So you've got that aspect that you can mix and match the elements. So, as you're spending your points and building your forces, you get to work out, and what we tend to do is we'll say to each other, okay, here's 1,000 points, bring your 1,000-point army. We don't tell each other what it is. We decide what the scenario is, and then you find out through the game, because that's more interesting to see what the other guys brought to the game.
Nice.
That's awesome.
So again, telling the story is what's really important. And look, as with all rule set, you could, somebody came to me and said, you can break your rules. And so I'm sure you can. He said, I could choose 10 novice Taliban, arm them all with an RPG, and all give them the Sword of Allah, which is a sniper ability, right? I said, well, yeah, you could, but how realistic is that? And he's like, what do you mean? I said, we're about realism. Yeah. We're not about the maximum amount of points to win the game. We're about realism. So, yeah, you could do what you wanted to do there, but is that just winning the game at all costs, or is it telling the story? And I think the guy got it, because he went away and obviously rejigged things and came back. So it's that concept, right? Everybody can write, or everybody can create that absolute winning group, but that's not what, reality tells you that's not the case.
That's awesome. So let's talk about the expansions that you have come up with. Right. And my favorite expansion of yours is the one I can never pronounce.
Malanti Rangers.
Thank you. You say it so much better than I. Which is
a bad pronunciation of what I assume it is. We had a thing that we did. The reason it's called Skirmish Sangin is a really important place in Afghanistan. The reason we call it Malanti Rangers, Day of the Rangers in
the Battle of Mogadishu, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But it's actually Day of the Rangers, but yeah. So the concept being is, we try to name things as that's reflective, and so that's what we named that one with. And we built that all around, the different books that came out at the time, lots of videos and bits and pieces. But to be honest, it was one of those games that is there's not a lot of information around. A lot of it is still very either hush-hush, or actually people just didn't record the information at the time. Yeah. So yeah, you've got Black Hawk Down, the movie, you've got Black Hawk Down, the books, which are, great resources. But we got criticized for that book by not putting any maps in, because a lot of people said, well, how do we know what it was? But the problem was that we couldn't get any clear maps. We could not find any distinctive idea of what actually happened. So what we did is we let people make their own minds up. We gave a brief description based on the elements, but it still had the scenarios in it, So yeah, those are the sorts of things that we created there.
And it's kind of, I don't know, kismet, if you will, that we're actually talking about this at this time, because we have just passed the 25th anniversary of the Battle of Mogadishu, October 3rd, 1993. So it's been 25 years since that's happened. It holds a special place in my heart, Colin, because one of my instructors at Black Hawk School was there. He was with the 160th, and then one of my classmates in my class for Black Hawk School was with the 10th, and he was there as well. So I actually knew a few people that were there, and so it holds a place in my heart, and it's a very well done expansion. It's obviously done with respect and love for the material, and I think it does a really good job of getting you into the feel of it. And of course, it has rules for helicopters.
Absolutely.
And
we definitely need them.
you know, because if anybody knows me, you know, like John on Beast of War loves his tanks, I love me helicopters.
Absolutely.
So it's much appreciated to see those in there. So that's an excellent expansion. So when you're ready to get out of Afghanistan and continue on with a really good rule set, the next one would be Somalia and Mogadishu, which leads you into the continent of Africa, spelled differently. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that one? So
we got a little bit of flack from Melanti Rangers, probably the one book that we've had the most amount of flack from. And so we decided we would take what we called a fantasy modern Africa. And the reason we spelled it with a K was to make it different. And also what we did is we removed all the original borders and we redrew the map. And then we created new countries and populated them with different problems and bits and pieces, so that some countries have invaded other countries. You've got terrorism in certain places. You've got Al-Qaeda in other places. You've got the West trying to put its influence. You've got China trying to put their influence. So we recreated a fantasy Africa, not fantasy as in orcs and elves, but fantasy as in this isn't real, and allowed people to play in that space, depending whether they are Western forces, or they could be Russian forces, they could be Chinese forces, or they could be local forces. And we put OBATs for all the local forces in there, so that you could play at any element and create different games. And then we've got a series of linked scenarios at the back, which is about South Africa, and I'll let you guess where that may have been. Country invading, I can't remember who pronounced it, but basically Madagascar. Right, it was a sneaky invasion of Madagascar, and there's a whole reason why elements have been found in Madagascar, and so that they go there. So the whole idea was to get people to be able to play in a space that they didn't have to worry about offending anybody, you know, and so that's why we created it.
Do you think making it a fictional world or continent or countries took away from some of the realism, or do you think it translated well?
I was very surprised. I had a couple of letters from people asking me whether I'd ever worked in military intelligence, and the reason for that is because I wrote the country breakdowns. I didn't realize, but from a military intelligence position. So I think it allows people to still play what you'd call as realistic games. But, you know, the names have been changed to protect the innocent, shall we say. And
So
work through that process. So the combat is still the same. The weapons are still the same. All those things, that are out there in Africa are still available. You know, you were talking earlier about, some places have World War II weaponry. That's in the book in certain places, right up to absolutely modern Chinese missiles are in the book as well. So you've got that aspect of depending where you want to play and depending how you want to play will allow you to apply those aspects.
Excellent.
It almost sounds like alternate historical rather than fantasy.
Yeah. Well,
if the age of colonialism had ended differently, Africa could have taken this different shape. All the moving parts are still the same, but it just took a different shape as far as what countries were where, what rivalries were there, things like that.
Yeah, so that's basically what we've tried to do, just to create enough conflict that anybody can sit there and go, right, I'm going to take this country now. And also we've tried to keep the aspect, the north of Africa is still Arab-like. Middle Africa is, as it is, Southern Africa has a lot of colonial elements, left over. But also, we've got, if you look at Africa now, there's a massive input of information and money from China. The US is trying to put stuff in there. Europe is trying to put stuff in there. Everybody's trying to influence. Everybody's trying to get to the resources. So we built that into the game so that you could have, you could play your mercenary units, you could play your PMCs, you could play actual special forces doing specific ops. All of those things that you see on different movies could be played into the space.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So you came out with another expansion. I think this was last year, was it not, Colin? Plausible Deniability? Was it about a year now? Maybe a little over?
Just a little bit over a year ago, we came out with Plausible Deniability. And that was something that we've always wanted to do, but, there's only an X amount of time. Plausible Deniability is the spec ops aspect of Skirmish Sangin. A lot of people get hooked on the concept that we call it Skirmish Sangin, it must be Afghanistan. We're saying this is a modern combat system. You can play it anywhere. We just happen to base it in Afghanistan to give you examples. And then obviously we've took it out into different countries, etc. So plausible deniability is all the ORBATs that we could think of for GROM, for the SAS, for the French Foreign Legion, for MARSOC, for all of those great elements. We've put them together in one book so you can choose the units that you want to do and create your teams. And then we gave them a whole set of scenarios, and these scenarios are based from the Ukraine through to Saudi Arabia, all over the show. The idea being is to show people you can take your basic premise of the rules and run any kind of game that you feel. One of the games is about robbing a bank. Another one is about rescuing spies. You've got to get them across the bridge. There's all these sorts of things that we put in there to try and show you that the system isn't just about asymmetrical warfare, right? And so that the specialist aspects to the spec ops, specialist equipment, specialist techniques and tactics, and how they can play those into the game. So we brought that into it so that we're just trying to round out that people can play all these different aspects.
Nice.
It's actually really, really interesting because, people, sometimes ask me on tabletop, here's what's happening in the 40s, here's what's happening in the 60s, here's what's happening in the 80s. Where do you see warfare going in the future? And these are my ideas. I'm not any kind of, Defense Department analyst or anything like that, but it's what the Department of Defense is looking at, what the Pentagon's looking at, what intelligence communities and long-range planning is being done in other countries, is warfare is becoming more and more and more urbanized. I think we've recently passed the point where over half of the world's population now lives in cities greater than 1 million people. And that's affecting the terrain and it's affecting the tactics. And at least here in the United States, as our police force gets more and more militarized, and then you see actions, especially maybe not so much in Afghanistan, but definitely near the end of Iraq, where the U.S. Army and U.S. Marine Corps and also allied coalition forces are having to act more and more like police. The line between police tactics and police, operations and strictly military operations, I think is becoming increasingly blurred. I think our police are going to become more like the military, and our military is going to become more like the police. And we're going to see a lot more of the actions like the ones you're describing here in plausible deniability, where it's not so much a battlefield anymore. The whole idea of the battlefield is becoming obsolete. It's going to be, can you get this high profile, this high value, person, this tango out of this building before he gets assassinated? Can you, get this spy back across the bridge? Can you break into this shipping container and see what's really in there? Is it, weapon of mass destruction? Is it another load of cocaine? Who knows what's going on in there? I think that's really interesting and a really interesting direction to take the series.
The other aspect that we've come across in game through research and things is we're getting less and less men involved, and I say men, obviously men and women, in each battle. That we're getting smaller and smaller forces. People aren't putting 500 or 600 people in when 20 or 30 well-armed, well-supported people can do the job. So we're seeing a much smaller and much more intense, almost laser aspect to combat at the moment. Mm-hmm. And that was, I was thinking, I was reflecting those sorts of aspects through that. Because it's a lot easier now to send 8 guys in armed to the teeth with, with the UAV support as well as helicopters and just about everything else you can think of to go and do a job than it is to now create an invasion where I've got, 3 battleships, a whole lot of landing crafts, vehicles, 2,000 or 3,000 men. Just sheer cost alone, one better than the other, right?
No more Operation Overlord, much more Zero Dark 30.
Yeah.
Exactly right. That sort of thing. But it doesn't mean to say we're not capable of doing that. It means that actually we can make the solution better, quicker, faster, and more reactive.
The trade-off meaning that those few men or those few operators, those few people are going to have to be trained to an absolute razor's edge, and those people become extremely valuable.
Exactly. Well, let's face it. Think how much money you've invested in them.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a bigger investment nowadays.
Yeah. So that's the sort of things that we're trying to include into the kind of range of the game.
That's fantastic. So you're talking about plausible deniability. I'm sitting here thinking Sicario in the scenarios, the movie, and you can put that on the tabletop. That is too cool. Cool.
If you look at one of the scenarios in there, it was, should we say, influenced by Sicario.
Uh-huh.
I'd never heard of the movie until the guy I wrote it with, Michael Charge, said, go look at this movie. So obviously, I look at this movie, and he says, right, I want to write something like that. So then obviously we created some bits and pieces that are like that. So, that whole aspect. And that's where I think we should be as gamers. We should be looking at all the books and the movies and things that excite us and go, right, how can we put these into these games that we play, and have that fun and that narrative that we bounce each other off, That's, you should have the same excitement to me after a game as you do as we come out the movies when you start talking about the movie.
Fantastic.
Absolutely. I honestly think that's where a huge part of the whole recent renaissance, I say recent, like 20 years ago, renaissance in World War II gaming came from. I mean, is it any coincidence that 50 versions of Call of Duty came out for the PlayStation, plus Bolt Action, plus Flames of War? Did all this really just happen to come out right after Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers came out? I mean, come on. So obviously, you want to go out, you want to see a movie, and then you want to come out from that movie, keeping in mind that it was a movie. I mean,
right.
People who follow me on the site know that that's my very first eye roll. I saw this in a movie. Well, there are movies and there are movies, But yeah, it could definitely be a great starting point for research into a more serious military problem.
So, Jim, I heard your favorite World War II TV show is Hogan's Heroes.
That's and my favorite movie is Inglourious Bastards. Let's not push any buttons. I'm gonna go ahead and let you get away with that one. There you go.
So, speaking of the cyclic, so do you think we're gonna see a resurgence of Vietnam next? As far as movies and then getting back into gaming there, because early 80s, it's like a 20-year cycle. We had Platoon and Full Metal Jacket and a few others that came out.
We recently had, not to get on too many of other people's games, but Flames of War just came out with the new Nam supplement. Not that I had anything to do with it, but about 2 months after my article series on Beasts of War, again, nothing to do with each other, but just for me personally, we were aiming at the 50th anniversary of the Tet Offensive. So this past January 2018, we did, 50 years ago, 1968 January is Tet Offensive. Probably the most symmetrical that the Vietnam War ever got. It's almost the Vietnam War in reverse, where, the NBA and the NLF come out of the bush and they're coming after us out in the open, as opposed to vice versa. So, I mean, and then, of course, right after that, probably because of the Tet Offensive, Flames of War came out with their new Nam supplement. Vietnam has always scared wargamers, I think. I don't know if Flames of War really does it right. I think that doesn't. It's trying to do it too much like World War II, the sequel. Mm-hmm. I think they're missing the mark a little bit on how things like casualty evacuation is so important. This is another thing I'm really happy to hear about in Skirmish Sangin. Casualty evacuation is got to be huge, and it's great that that's part of the game. Because what happens is, if you're going to do it realistically, and you're going to do the math, and you're going to do the firepower rates and the training levels and the real ranges and all the things that you guys are talking about, you're going to put a squad of, Navy SEALs or, Army Rangers or Delta Force or something like that up against, 20 or 30 Taliban. It's going to be a massacre. They call it asymmetrical warfare for a reason. It's not fair. And one of the ways that you balance that is you enforce casualty evacuation, rules of engagement, civilians getting in the way, things like that. You enforce that on your free world forces and not so much on your insurgent forces. Your insurgent force takes a hit, one of their guys go down, the rest of the force just keeps on going. No problem. But if a Marine goes down or an Army Ranger goes down, okay, now the rest of his fire team has to get him off the field, and that becomes a big problem. And that's how you kind of balance that asymmetrical part, and you kind of bring the sheer amount of training, resources, firepower, technology, you bring all that under some kind of control in a gaming sense, just so that the guy who plays, either, the insurgent in Iraq or Afghanistan isn't constantly just getting mowed down by what would realistically just be, vastly superior forces. You have to put these restrictions and constraints on your free world forces to enforce that asymmetrical dynamic.
And could you imagine on a 10 by 8 foot table if you had to do a casualty evac and you had to get all the way back to the other side? It's just mind boggling.
And don't forget at that point, you're calling the helicopter in and the Taliban fire their RPG off it. They can be right at the other end of the table and they can still hit that helicopter.
Yeah, that's amazing.
We've had Vietnam edition. We kind of wrote our own edition of Valor and Victory by Barry S. Doyle for Vietnam, and we've had games like that. A guy goes down. You don't just remove the piece from the table. There's now a casualty marker there. Okay, good thing, I built it into my list. I have a medic on a helicopter. In goes the helicopter. The helicopter goes down. Okay, now I got 2 casualty points. Before I know it, I'm reenacting Black Hawk Down. Talk about Day of the Rangers. Now I got to send another helicopter out to go after the first helicopter. The first guy's still bleeding out. It becomes a massive problem for your free world forces. It really does.
But it really makes a great story.
Absolutely.
You're all talking about it, just like you guys are, and it becomes this thing that the more the problem, the more you enjoy solving it. Right. So as the problem builds up, you get more and more head up and excited about it and all the rest of it. But just to point to what you were saying about Vietnam, we wrote a Vietnam supplement that we never released a couple of years, well, probably 4 years ago now, because there was no interest. We couldn't get people interested in it.
Really?
But just recently, we've started to ask, people have started on the forum saying, so have you ever thought about Vietnam? Have you ever thought about, so perhaps you're right. Perhaps that 20-year cycle is turning. And, this time next year, we might be looking at a Vietnam supplement. At the moment, there was so little interest in it, we never took it any further forward. And we definitely don't have it in our schedule for the next 12 months. But if it began to show interest, then, I think, Sangin would work well in that environment.
Traditionally, it's a hard sell. Just as like a setting. People have a lot of preconceptions about what the war was like. They picture, you can't see more than 6 inches in front of your face. Everything's always an ambush. Every firefight's over in 10 seconds. And, that's actually not really true. And at least here in the States, there's also a little bit of a stigma attached to it. Nobody wants to, recreate it or whatever. It doesn't sound fun. The theme music to Platoon is very downbeat, to kind of put a bit of a joke on it. But if you're a serious war gamer, and obviously this sounds like the kind of gamer that you're going after, this isn't, it wouldn't be a beer and pretzels game, that's for sure.
No,
I would definitely be interested in trying it out. I think we could get a group together to try it out. So I wanted to talk about a hidden gem of yours, Colin.
Right.
It's unfortunately not a lot of people know about it. I backed it on Kickstarter. I'm holding the hardback edition here, and that was Skirmish Ragers, which was a zombie game.
A zombie apocalypse.
Yes.
Skirmish war rules.
I love
zombie
zombies.
So I think you're right about it being a hidden gem. Without putting too fine a point on it, it was called a different name, and unfortunately we had to change it. And I think by the fact that we had to change it, a lot of people lost the connection or lost the idea, and so they didn't realize it was the same game. The Kickstarter went very, very well, but after that, it's the sort of thing that people pick up and go, oh, I haven't heard about this, haven't seen this, even though we've tried as much as you can with any game to kind of get it out there and get it known. But again, the concept of zombies, what's not to love about playing a game of zombies? But, it goes up and it goes down depending on, how relevant the TV series is at the moment, right? And we definitely see a surge in sales when the TV series has just launched its latest, and then it drops off as probably halfway through, 3/4 of the way through the series, as people begin to lose that aspect to it. But yeah, the hardback book that you're talking about is, it's a 200-page hardback book that's got every supplement that we've written about it, all in that hardback book. And what we've now done is we only sell the hardback book. All the softback ones we've stopped, and we just sell the hardback. And so basically you're getting 5 books in one. There's Medieval Mayhem, Hollywood Havoc, and these came about. We're working with another company. I'm just wondering whether I can actually mention them. Probably not, so I won't. But who produced a set of Monty Python-esque miniatures?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
I just don't know whether I'm allowed to say. So we came to them and said we'd love these miniatures. We'd like to write a supplement about it, and they said fine. And we came up with this kind of Westworld aspect where
you did not say Westworld.
Yeah.
That movie gives me nightmares as a child. I refuse to watch the TV show.
Yeah, this is the TV series came off, but so the Medieval Mayhem is in this kind of Westworld environment, and of course that's why everybody's dressed up in that, and the zombies kick in, and we followed that on with Hollywood Havoc. So you got all these people dressed up as Hollywood stars, and they're in that zombie aspect as well. And then we also played the more serious aspect, which was Year Zero and Zero Echo Delta, which is the military forces against the zombie apocalypse. So there was the kind of fun, tongue-in-cheek side of it, and then the more kind of serious kind of more of a real war game aspect to it.
Nice. It's a very good. I call this one Beer and Pretzels. It's one where you can get the kids together or some friends who aren't into, modern war gaming, and you could, play a zombie game. So it's a hidden gem. It really is. So, which leads us to Kickstarter, and what do you have coming up here in a few days from this recording?
So, on the 23rd of October, we have our new Kickstarter, which is called Ultra Combat. And basically, it's miniatures and rules for the modern world. This is more symmetrical. We have created currently a whole squad of US, whole squad of Russian ultra modern, the latest gear for both sets, that all the research we could find about them. We've created a whole set of new rule set to it, and there's going to be new vehicles. And obviously we hope it gets funded. And our aim there is to launch this new game called Ultra Combat that doesn't replace Skirmish Sangin. It's a different beast. Skirmish Sangin is very much that narrative aspect. This is a bit more, if you'd like, probably a little bit more traditional war game, but you can see the aspects of Skirmish Sangin in it. You can see that Skirmish Sangin is its grandfather, as it were. And again, we've kept the same. There's no need to measure ranges. The grenades make a real difference on the table, but it just allows you to play. The biggest issue is it allows people to play the game very, very quickly. Skirmish Sangin has a problem, or that people tell me, that it takes time to set up. With this Ultra Combat, the idea is you get a set of cards and you can set the game up in about 5 seconds, because you just basically select your cards and you're ready to go. And you can play it from individuals through to elements, through to squads, through to platoons, all with the cards. You just change the scale of your cards. So the idea being is you can play all sorts of different types of games. So one day we might be playing a squad-based game. Next day we might be playing a platoon-based game.
So when you say cards, are these like stat cards for the troops?
Yeah. So, you'd have a firearm, a fire team card, if you're playing at that scale, or you might have an individual rifleman card if you're playing at individual scale, or you might have a squad card if you're playing at the squad level. So if you're playing at platoon level, you'd have three squads. You'd have your heavy weapons teams and your HQ cards are basically 5 cards, and that's all you need to play the entire game. So setting the game up is really quick. So this is the concept behind it, is to make one set of rules, but the scale works to what you want to play that particular day.
And what size playing surface are you typically using?
So we've aimed this one at the more traditional 4x6. I mean, don't get me wrong, it plays beautifully on 10x8, but not everybody has 10x8, right? That kind of aspect. You can play a platoon apiece on that scale reasonably well. It's a platoon plus one or two vehicles. It's that kind of level. The rules are in their beta phase already, where we've been playtesting them for the best part of 6-8 months. They are a derivative of our other game that's just about to come out, which is the Skirmish Normandy game. So they all use the Ultra Combat system, but slightly differently. So the concept is that once you know the rules, you can play at whatever scale you want to play at.
Fantastic. So you mentioned Skirmish Normandy. So keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to talk about it in a second. What do you want to tell people about this Kickstarter that you have coming up? What do we have to look forward to? So
23rd of October is when it kicks in. We're going to run it for 28 days. In it you can pledge for miniatures or a whole rule set or miniatures and rules. It's got, like I say, the idea, what we want to create is a complete platoon of both Russian and US of individual miniatures. We've also created the first, we think it's the first anyway, but I haven't told otherwise, Boomerang, which is the Russian APC, 30mm cannon on it. And we've also created the US Striker with the new 30mm turret.
Oh, wow.
So currently, nobody's got those elements. And so what we're trying to do is get that funded so we can get these into production and get them out there.
And what is the typical game length, time-wise?
I would think about we're still aiming for that 2-hour mark.
Okay.
A complex game probably 3, but the idea being is most of us play on a weeknight. When we talk to people, you want a little bit of time to talk to your friends. You want to get in at 7:00. You really want to be done by 9:30 so that you can have a beer at the end and then travel home, right? So that's the concept of what we want people to be able to get a real result in that period rather than go, we played the game, but we just haven't got far enough.
Fantastic. Now, are these going to be metal or plastic?
They're all going to be metal.
Okay.
And
is this going to be a game that will be supported for the long run, or is this going to be, this is the Kickstarter, this is the game?
No, we never produce a game and just leave it. We will support this. We've already decided what the supplement is. Our next supplement for it is going to be US and European invasion of the Ukraine. So that's the aspect we want to go with, because we looked at, future wars, what's the potential. That seemed to be the closest of anyone. We've got some information that we can look at, and it's an area that we can know about. And so we have gone for that one. So it will be supported long term, just like Skirmish Sangin will be continued to be supported, but they're just a different beast, right? They do different scales.
Fantastic.
You guys hear that screaming? I think that's my wallet.
No.
Oh, lordy. So you're going back in time as well.
Yes.
Everything's been modern up to this point.
Yep.
Now you're going back in time to the 40s, the world's greatest generation, if you will. So
absolutely.
Why?
So, well, you remember I told you about that book by Donald Featherstone, Skirmish Wargaming?
Yes.
My favorite scenario in there is the Monte Cassino scenario that's written at the back of it. And I was a young boy in England, and I had no idea about Maori battalions and the Kiwis in battles. And now, of course, I live in New Zealand, and I've always wanted to reenact that particular skirmish element battle. And I've played it using those rules and lots of other rules over time. But I've always had this thing in me that I've wanted to do my own version of World War II. And, it's a very busy area, very, very busy genre. There's lots of people out there, and everybody's an expert as well, I find it when I talk to people. Everybody seems to be an expert in World War II.
Everyone thinks they're an expert.
Yeah, just ask them, they'll tell you.
Yeah. So it was something I'd wanted to do, and people had said, don't do it. And I got to the point where I was like, you know what? I read a book that was called Second World War Infantry Tactics by Stephen Bull that really summed up what I thought about World War II and kind of fed me further information and really fed the need. And I thought, right, I've got to create this rule set. And so that's what Skirmish Normandy is. And at the time, we were developing the Ultra Combat system. And so we funneled it down that route to see whether it would work, and it did, just as we're funneling it down the modern combat route. With tweaks, obviously, there's differences. And we've been, again, heavily playtesting that. The final draft went to the editors on Friday. It's very, very close to being released.
Fantastic. We'll make sure we link to all of this here in our show notes. So, Colin, where's the future for your company and your games? What do we see coming up beyond what we've talked about tonight?
So,
what you can tell us, obviously.
Yeah. So there's always things we can't. But we're always into moderns, right? We love modern era. It's the thing that we like the best. And what we wanted to do was do some playing around with that in a kind of fictional sense. And so what we're trying to achieve at the moment is the most realistic alien invasion game you can possibly imagine, right? Because, we always see these aliens and they turn up with tripods and they get killed by the common cold and all that sort of stuff. We wanted to say what would happen if they did it right? So, their attack day one is the equivalent of D-Day attacking Europe, right? And work it from there. So we've been working with a couple of sculptors out of Weta Workshop, and they've come up with what our aliens look like, and we've been working more in that process and coming up with this concept. So you're going to have ultra modern forces of humanity against these aliens with their modern technologies, and to see whether they can, fight for the Earth, see who wins.
Well, I'll tell you what, it must be a sign that you're becoming pretty big in the industry if you've got the guys over at Weta working with you. These are the masterminds behind all the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies, and they have their own games. So for them to, help you out with some sculpts, that's pretty impressive.
So it's just some of the sculptors at Weta. It's not Weta themselves.
Oh, okay.
But also,
still, it's the talent.
Living in the same city,
yeah.
And Wellington is a very small city.
Yeah.
You can't bump into people, and you get people excited, and the next thing you know, they want to help you.
Yeah.
And so that's where we've got some of our sculpting done, and obviously got all the designs for the aliens sorted out and things. So yeah, it's a process. It's it's still ongoing. We're pushing towards it won't come out. The earliest anybody will see its head will be the third quarter of next year. We had hoped for it to be the third quarter this year, but everything had to get pushed back for Ultra Combat.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's that next stage is to be a little bit more, it'll be a little bit more beer and pretzels in concept, but it'll be as realistic a sense of an invasion as possible. There won't be this aspect of ridiculousness about the aliens. We want them to be here for a reason.
Fantastic. That sounds really good. Very promising. Any final thoughts, Colin?
I think that's it.
That's quite a bit, huh? We kind of.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Chris, you have any final thoughts for today's show?
I'm aliens, zombies, modern, ultra. Oh, my wallet's just screaming right now.
Uh-huh.
Colin and Chris are getting a lot of my money this year.
That's excellent. Just remember, ramen noodles are cheap. So
yes.
Anything from you, Jeb?
No, I'll tell you what. I'm very impressed with what I hear about Skirmish Sangin. I'm definitely gonna. I've heard the name before, but I've never really been exposed to it or checked it out in detail. But I tell you what, I'm gonna have to change that now. Based on what I'm hearing here in this podcast.
Excellent. Well, that's one of the reasons for having the podcast is to get it out there for people who aren't familiar with, rule sets and games. And it's a game that I've been stalking Colin for, 4 or 5 years now. Ever since I started with Beast of War. It was one of my very first projects that I brought to light. So
it's almost validating. It's like, oh, somebody else out there actually gets it.
Yes.
I'm not alone in the wilderness. This is great.
Yeah. So we want to thank you, Colin, for joining us tonight on the SitRep podcast. And for Chris and Jim and myself, we want to thank everybody for listening. And we'll be back in 2 weeks. And we will have Ralph with us as we sit around the sand table and we talk about anything related to modern miniature wargaming. And I think, Chris, we've got to pick a winner, don't we, for our scenario contest?
Yes, we do.
So, and then we're going to be looking at some other games and systems in the future. And remember, when we get to that 100th person on the Facebook page, we're going to try and set up a live podcast so we can get everybody involved. And Colin, we're going to catch up with you in a few months to see how everything's progressing and go from
Excellent.
there.
Definitely.
So
Look forward to it.
awesome. So to everybody out there, we thank you. And as we like to say in the show, we're going to RTB. We're returning to base, and we'll see you next time.